What's going on, everybody? It's Coos here with a pop-up surprise live stream here. Appreciate you guys coming on. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I had some technical difficulties. Microphone, camera, none of that was working, so I had to restart the whole computer and start over again. But anyway, thank you guys that are on here for hanging out and not getting impatient and belling on us. But I'm joined today, guys, by Mike Asti. Most West Virginia fans probably know Mike. He does his own stuff here on YouTube, and he also does some writing. But Mike, I'll let you kind of tell everybody where they can find you.
Sure. Yeah. Appreciate having me on. Definitely excited to talk some ball. I know we've definitely interacted on social media, so why not do one of these?
Right.
WV Sports Now is the outlet, so I do cover the Mountaineers on a beat there. WV Sports Now, also managing editor over there, and you can find us all over at Mike Asti 11. You can see above there is my Twitter handle. I do a whole separate show in Pittsburgh media with the Believe Network, contribute to the Fan amongst Pittsburgh media and PXI and other outlets. And I've been with the Trib. So the Tribune Review ran what was the TV radio side of that outlet that used to exist for years. Reporter with PXI, called a lot of games, did a lot of play-by-play in color for high school sports. And then Robert Morris University, for anybody who knows the Pittsburgh area. And then did college radio at WVU. And now back here covering the Mountaineers, still with Pittsburgh media, kind of doing it out of the Pittsburgh media scope. But yeah, covering WVU. And that means immersing myself back amongst the fan base and amongst this very asinine season that we are dealing with right now.
You picked you didn't pick the best season, Mike, to do
that. That's true. It's not my fault though.
I know.
Last year was similar, but yes, maybe everywhere I goes seems to get wilder. But I can also say that it's not like the Steelers have calmed down, even though I'm off that beat. I covered Antonio Brown, so I've dealt with I've dealt with wildness before. Yeah, so this is at least not as insane off the field.
Yeah, good point. That's and I think it's gotten wilder since he retired. But anyway,
maybe, yeah, maybe
a little crazy lady from what I'm seeing on social media. But anyway,
yeah.
That being said, let's jump right in. You did an article the other day, and I found it interesting because I had been chatting with people online on Twitter about.
Yeah.
I see fans come on Twitter and they're like, "You guys need to stop, bashing the coach or whatever." And they'll say, "We're not Alabama. You can't expect us to win conference championships every year." And we're at West Virginia. And I'm thinking, number one, majority of fans I have communicated with never said that they expect to win conference championships every year.
Right.
Number two, West Virginia has historically, if you look back through history and even recent history, have never had a 3-year stretch where we never went above 6 games. Not since 1979. So in my entire lifetime, we've never had a 3-year stretch, what could be a 4-year stretch, potentially this bad. So
yeah, me too. I think I'm a little younger than you. So me as well.
You are.
Yeah.
So yeah, in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So I've been, I was kind of defending that stance that, hey man, we need to have higher expectations. And you wrote an article about it. So I found your article to be very interesting and kind of hit the nail right on the head. And can you talk a little bit to that article and what, and I'll link to it in the description, by the way, for those of you who want to check it out, but after the video's over, but
sure.
Go ahead and talk to that article a little bit.
Yeah. So, and you can find it also at WV Sports Now just by searching, because it's kind of back there in the channel at this point now, but it's titled WVU Football Fans Should Expect More, but Need to Be Reasonable. So kind of exactly what you're saying a little bit. And it does go all over the place. And this has been the case with West Virginia fans forever, but I feel like this conversation has been heightened since West Virginia got into the Big 12. And you have the Orange Bowl year, and then nothing's ever been what that was once you get back in the Big 12, even though there have been some good seasons. And, of course, the last 4 years, as you mentioned, it's the toughest stretch the program's had in well over 30 years, or 40 years. You can have that argument of this is the first time they started 0-2 since 79, and that was before Don Nalen. So this is that type of run for West Virginia fans that they're obviously going to be upset with. And that's why when you get into year 4, the conversation is going to be about what to do with the future. Do you stay with the same coach? Regardless of what's going to happen, that fans are going to go in that direction because there's frustration. And I think everyone on every end of the spectrum can understand that.
Yeah.
And it does include the COVID year. So I guess that 6, not winning 6 or more, they did lose a game that season, but it's not like they were going to beat Oklahoma anyway. So they can bring that up, but it probably would have been another loss in all reality that year. But I just basically wanted to touch on my thoughts And this even connects to some former players and other colleagues. I got their thoughts as well before I wrote it. I actually do a show with Rasheed Marshall. I got his thoughts as well after putting that article up on what the expectations should be. And you do have West Virginia as the 15th winningest program ever. There's tons of history there, tons of success there. But there's also a situation at WVU that it's not Alabama. And to be honest with you, and let's be real here, it's probably never going to be Alabama. This 10-year stretch Alabama's undertaking, there are not many programs that are ever going to experience that. And I would say the height of West Virginia hasn't experienced that and will never experience that. So expecting the Mountaineers to win the conference every year, even if it's the Big 12 after Oklahoma and Texas, would be unreasonable. So you do need to be reasonable. Expecting West Virginia to contend for a national title probably more than once every 20 years might be unreasonable. I'm not saying they couldn't have quality years, but even a 10-win year, that's not really contending for a national title, at least on this current system. Now, a lot of this might change when you get the 12 teams in the playoff. That will open up the door. If you look at this year, if you had 12 teams getting in this year, you would have 2 lost teams. So you could have 2 losses and maybe get in. But West Virginia is also a program that, in terms of history, 15th winningest, absolutely. Undefeated season, and granted, it was 100 years ago that I've argued they probably should claim as a national title in 1922. You have the 89 season. You have a lot obviously with Pat White and even Rasheed Marshall before him, the Don Nalen run, Rich Rod's run, and even Bill Stewart after him. A lot of Mountaineer fans were upset with that tenure, and that included 9-win seasons.
Yep.
So you do have to be reasonable in what you expect. But this is also a program that has an under 500 record in bowl games throughout history. Neil Brown's been in a bowl game, won the Liberty Bowl, lost the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. So 1-1, as much as I don't think these 4 years have been acceptable, 1-1 in bowl games in 4 years is actually on par with the history of the program in terms of winning and losing bowl games. They've had stretches, even under Holgorsen, of losing bowl games. And it just really feels like a lot of the fans are on 2 different sides, as you touched on. Some expect that because West Virginia fans, and I was in college at WVU at the time this occurred. During the Pat White era, all those bowl games in a row, winning 5 straight New Year's Day or better bowl games, BCS caliber contention and bowl wins every single season, national contention for potentially vying for a national title in several of those years. West Virginia fans maybe also got a little spoiled because you had that period that was unique to the history of the program. You then have a little bit of where it's not national title contention, but it's still really quality bowl games. You don't have Bill Stewart there any longer. And there were a lot of people that maybe were upset that he got the job because really feeling like he got it because Pat White said you should have it. And he never really had that resume to garner a top 5 national powerhouse at that point. And then Daniel Holgorsen took it, won an Orange Bowl. So going into the Big 12, I actually watched the post game on ESPN the other day. And Geno Smith, and they were talking about the Big 12 should be terrified to have West Virginia there. Geno's all excited. He had another year left. Talking like West Virginia could take that Orange Bowl win and become a national powerhouse in the Big 12. And even Pat McAfee talking about Neil Brown's tenure that I thought we were going to grab the bull by the horns in the Big 12 and be this national power. You could argue that might have been an unreasonable expectation. It's not to say that you never should have those quality seasons, but you're getting an Orange Bowl off of automatic bid still from a Big East championship where you were ranked in the top 25, but you weren't ranked top 15. You I think 24th that year going into the game. Clemson was 15, not top 10. So you're dealing with that, and then in the conference, you're not going to have that. You're going to have brand names of Texas and Oklahoma in there prior to them eventually leaving. So fans need to expect, and I do think it's reasonable to expect, getting in bowl games on a regular basis. I do think in a 4 or 5 year stretch, and Neil Brown will be going into year 5 next year, you can expect, it is reasonable to expect multiple bowl appearances, probably multiple bowl wins even. You're not in these guaranteed rate bowls and these average bowl games, you're not playing programs that are any better than you. Right. So going in there and not really showing up in those games, that is a black eye. You should be able to at least win those games, at least more often than not. But to expect winning a conference more than probably competing for that conference title once every 6-7 years, to expect being a national power, to expect winning national championship, that might be unreasonable. And even if you get in a playoff every now and then, because if you have that special year every 5 or 6 years and get in the playoff, it's likely where you're losing in the quote unquote first round. But obviously, if you get in the top 12, get in the playoff and lose in the first round, that should be thought of as a great year for the Mountaineers.
Right.
It shouldn't be that, okay, you lose in the first round, and what are you doing? It's kind of what Bob Huggins is dealing with a little bit now, and his program's dipped a bit. But people talking to us about how it's been 4 or 5 years in a row of the Mountaineers basketball-wise not doing anything. 2 years ago, you win a tournament game. I'm not saying that you're going to expect this and it's fine because the program was bad last year. But if you win a playoff game and then you lose right after that, that should be a quality season. So it's just tempering expectations, because there's also another end of the fan base that exists, and this can go to schedule that I'm sure we'll talk about here in a moment, that they don't really care about wins and losses. I have a friend who's just thrilled. He hates being in the Big 12. There's no national rivals there. He's happy to play Pitt, happy to play Virginia Tech, played Maryland recently, thrilled about that, happy to have Penn State on the schedule next year. And if they go 4 or 5 wins in those years, that's actually something that he prefers than to have Townsend and Charlotte and whoever else on the schedule out of conference, maybe one game against someone he doesn't care about, Power 5, and then playing a Big 12 schedule against quote-unquote rivals that they're going to advertise but aren't really rivals that anyone cares about that have been West Virginia fans for a while. But at the end of the day, that's not good for the program either. You got to be able to have fun games. I like scheduling them. But you got to occasionally get in bowl games. You got to occasionally do a little better than that. You got to make sure that your 4 or 5 win season play in Alabama in the future. Like when they play Alabama in the future, if that's a 4 or 5 win year and you play Bama really tough, what does that really do to the program? Because you remember, they played Bama recently in recent memory.
And it was competitive.
It was competitive. Clint Trickett played really well. People thought he was the next guy. Nick Saban even complimented the program. A lot of that national broadcast was about West Virginia. They're not going to beat Alabama, but they could be something. And what did that really do for the program?
Not much.
Not much. So how much do you want to do that? But yeah, it's just tempering expectations and being realistic with what they are. But I do believe that you can expect more than what we've experienced over the last 4 years. It's just expecting the Pat White era to happen more than probably once every 40 years. That's probably unreasonable.
Yeah. No moral victories. That's what comes to mind when you talk about that Alabama game. But as a fan, like myself, and I agree with Jordan's comment here, by the way, and Jordan made a comment earlier. He said, Jordan, to your comment earlier about Mike and I think we'll put you in that conversation as well, brother. You're doing good work out there. But here he talks about how, he feels like we've been in the Big 12 now over a decade. We should have at least been in the top 2 in the conference at least one time. And that's about my expectations. We should be
fair. Yeah, once a decade,
or at the top of 1 or 2 in the league at least once a decade. Because that's about, if you look back through our history, that's kind of where we've been. We had the 88 season where we played for a national title. Had some losing seasons after that, or some mediocre seasons that we went undefeated again in 93.
Yeah.
Didn't really do a whole lot, or I think it was 93. Didn't do a whole lot really until the Rich Rod days. We went on that.
Yeah, then it was a dip.
3 straight seasons of 10 wins.
Right.
After he had a losing season.
Yeah.
And then a mediocre season, and then he started taking off because of the Pat White, Steve Slayton, Owen Schmidt type, unit. But then Dana comes in, win the Big East, win a BCS bowl game in year 1. Things look great. We go a little bit downhill, but we at least stay, in that 7-8. We did have the 4-win year, but everything else we've had at least 7-8 wins a year.
Right.
And now the 2018 season is the season I look at as being, that's the year in this decade, last decade, we should have been in the conference championship game, because we were 1 win away and dropped 2 in a row, and should have never dropped that Oklahoma State game. That was
that's the game, because I remember at the time actually even trying to explain this to some other colleagues. There's another WVU alum that works in Pittsburgh media that just occasionally writes about the Mountaineers, but he was talking about how almost have been losing to Oklahoma that year, and I was trying to tell him I wouldn't feel like a loss to Oklahoma being the brand they are, and people can say they're overrated nationally, but they're still above West Virginia in terms of what they're going to get recruiting wise, and it'll be tough for them in the SEC. But going back to that year, losing to Oklahoma, that doesn't get in my craw as much. If West Virginia would go through an entire year once a decade and have 1 or 2 losses and be vying for a top 2 spot in the conference, and then all of a sudden you lose to Oklahoma and you're runner-up for the conference title, kind of like what West Virginia's done in basketball with Kansas. It's not like when West Virginia with Bob Huggins goes to the conference title game, gets a 3 seed in the tournament, because that would still get you top 12 in the playoff, and then loses to Kansas. Nobody's mad. You want to win. It's annoying if it happens too often, but you're not. It's hard to be upset about it, knowing that they're getting 5-star recruits and you got 3-star recruits. So when that happened in the end of the year, you lose to Oklahoma, it's not the end of the world. But the issue is losing to Oklahoma State as well, which put you in that situation. If you had beat Oklahoma State, it wouldn't have been as big of a deal, and the Oklahoma game really wouldn't have mattered. So, yeah, messing it up. That year should have been that year, and if you would have had that year be a special year, maybe this would be easier to swallow, even though that was with a different head coach. But yeah, I think once a decade's fair, and I also think now, because you have a system and it's been in the Big 12, but it's going to be continuing on, where you're scrapping divisions. It's just the top 2 teams in the conference are going to play. That's really how it should be across the board in college football.
I agree.
Because the way things are going in the SEC right now, Tennessee has the best win. They're undefeated. They're a playoff team right now. But they're in a arguably worse situation than Bama, who they just beat. Because if Bama goes ahead and wins the conference and they beat the number 1 team to do it, but Tennessee loses to, say, Georgia, the number 1 team in the country before that game, Bama's going to get in and Tennessee is going to be left out, and Tennessee beat Bama. If you had no divisions, because they still have them, then you just have the top 2 teams play. Bama would basically be out of it right now as the 3rd best team in the conference. So I do like the Big 12 having the 2 best play. If they would have had the 2 best play even further back, they probably would have had another year of national contention with the whole TCU Baylor mess.
Yeah, I think it was 2014, maybe. I think it was the year.
Yeah, 2012, 2014, something like that. 2014. 2014, I think it was. Yeah, so that they kind of screwed themselves by having that situation that I detailed. Yeah, and then if you're winning games and you beat the conference opponents, you'll get in the top 2, certainly now without Texas and Oklahoma being there, and then you can play for it. So I once a decade to expect that, I think that's absolutely fair, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, the last moment is the Orange Bowl of really being a national top 10 type of team, top 15 type of team. It's happened occasionally, but that year is that year. You mentioned 7-8 win seasons happened under Dana, but that's the last year where West Virginia was really probably scary to teams that are going to win other conferences.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that wasn't a Big 12 year. But at the end of the day, it also is annoying to me a little bit complaining about being in the Big 12, because as much as ACC or other conferences would be a national fit, if West Virginia didn't get in the Big 12 when they were, who knows where this program is today?
Exactly.
I mean,
we would probably be in the AAC right now.
Right. And is that better when you're playing a Group of 5 schedule? No.
And the way things are going right now with the conferences, all this movement.
Yeah.
And it's so much focused on TV markets.
Yeah.
And eyeballs. Yeah. I got a feeling if we weren't in the Power 5 now, we may not ever get in one.
Yeah, because again, I'm coming from Pittsburgh media covering West Virginia. That's going to be seen as a negative to the ACC if they're trying to bring in West Virginia or whatever conference. And yeah, their academics and other things that we could talk about here, but they're going to say, and this is why that was the case back then. When you have Pitt, you don't need West Virginia too, because you're bringing the Pittsburgh media market with Pitt. Why do you need both of them? And that's the same situation that used to exist for Cincinnati. You can get that Cincinnati market with Louisville, even though they're not in Ohio. It's like Morgantown. They're in the Pittsburgh DMA, even though they're in another state. It's weird regionally, not to get in a whole media mess conversation. But that's going to be a negative when you're getting into conference realignment, all of that. I think West Virginia is more viable now than they would have been then, because it is more about subscribers, eyeballs, TV market's not as big of a deal. Like, I don't even have cable. I cut the cord, and I got YouTube TV and other different streaming platforms. So that still brings West Virginia eyeballs in that could be beneficial to your conference. And we've seen what ratings do when WVU plays an ACC school, for example, Virginia Tech, Pitt. You can see that example. But if your program's continuously losing and floundering to make bowl games, that's not going to be a good look either. So I do think West Virginia needs to get in a situation where they're at least on a regular basis getting in bowl games. Don't got to win them all, but got to win most of them. And then once a decade contending for a conference title, maybe twice a decade if you're losing Oklahoma and Texas because you don't have that national brand.
Yeah.
And then once now the way the system is, to be honest, Kuz, the way the system is now, if you contend nationally and you contend for a Big 12 conference title, say they stay in the Big 12 into the future of the next decade, that year, the year contending, can actually give you a chance at winning a national championship. I'm not saying you got to go ahead and expect them to win it every 10 years, but like, for example, the 2007 year, if that would have happened now with this current system of having the 12 teams in the playoff that's going to happen in the future, the Mountaineers would have had a bad loss there to finish out the year, but they probably would have still crawled in the top 12. And then once you're in the top 12, they could have avenged that and won games in the postseason and still won a national title despite having that bad loss. So you can make up for it now. You could argue it's going to be easier now when they get to the 12 teams than it would have been under the BCS or before. Because, 88, 93, those years – they were a national contender. They didn't get to be crowned national champion, but if you had a 12-team playoff, and even though they played for the de facto game in 88, they would have been able to avenge that and might have been able to win a national title those years. Right. So it might actually get easier that if you have that special year, it could peg into something more. But where the program is now, talking about winning a conference seems like it is light years away because right now they're trying to stabilize getting in bowl games on a regular basis, which, it needs to happen more often.
Yeah, and that year, and I'll get to the comment in a minute, but that year that we're talking about, 18, we were still, even though we lost those last couple games, we had a lot of fans were interested in our team. Casual fans wanted to sit down and watch a West Virginia game.
Helps you for the next year too.
Exactly, because we had Will Greer, we had David Seals. We played an exciting brand of football, and even games we lost, we were competitive in. Yeah, the games were close. We always had a chance to win. Even Oklahoma only beat us by 3 that year. And that game, were it not for that stupid penalty, blocking out a bounce penalty that never gets called, West Virginia may win that football game and beat Oklahoma. And, it's just so even though we're 8-4, we were a good 8-4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were nationally relevant. And
national relevant.
Right. I don't feel like we've had that since Brown's been here.
No. In terms of national relevance, I don't think so at all. Now, I do think, to be fair to Neil Brown, and this was the case for Rich Rodriguez that you brought up, that unlike Dana Holgorsen, who did have the advantage of inheriting a much better situation, West Virginia had won 9 games several years in a row, even though nobody really wanted Bill Stewart to be there. And that helped him benefit to win the Orange Bowl. Right. I mean, he put his offense in, and Geno Smith does say that he took himself to another level under Dana's offense. Right. But it wasn't like he was just horrendous and the team wasn't winning prior to Dana. They were winning. His numbers were good. And then they went to another level against Clemson in the Orange Bowl. So he gets credit for it, but he inherited a pretty good situation. Rich Rod inherited nothing. The Don Nalen left him nothing. The cupboard was bare. That's why the 3-8 season happened, and he had to build it back up. And then getting Pat White is how that was able to get built back up, basically, and even Rasheed Marshall before. And then you have a situation now, Dana Holgorsen left Neil Brown probably closer to what Don Nalen left Rich Rod than to what Dana inherited. It might not have been as bad, but there were a lot of people that really referred to that first year under Neil as year 0 because nothing was there. No one expected anything. So I don't think anyone's mad about that year. No. And then you build it up to the bowl win. Okay, you can trust the climb. It was nothing that was there. You win a bowl game. COVID's involved. Trust in the climb. The issue is, and I think this isn't talked about enough, honestly, this year's schedule was always going to be tough. When you're bringing back all these rivalries, when they scheduled this, they didn't know Virginia Tech was going to be as bad as they were. This could have been tougher, actually, because they're down. But when it was pen to paper, Virginia Tech was at least equal to you. And I don't think they also knew that Pitt was going to have their best season in 40 years because they weren't nearly as good when they put this schedule forth either. But this was always going to be a tough schedule. 2022 was always going to be tough. 2023 was always going to be tough. 2024 onward. 2021 was supposed to be a year that you build up the climb, you bring almost the same freaking team back.
Yeah.
This year's team's different, but that team was basically the same team as the year before that won the Liberty Bowl. And then for last year to be as bad as it was, and you talk about feeling like the 8-4 season was felt better than the record, I could argue that conversely, the 6-7 finish, losing the Guaranteed Rate Bowl last year, felt like a freaking 3-win year.
I can agree with that.
It wasn't fun to watch. You didn't really think they're going to win any of these games. You thought they could lose any given Saturday. It just, the national media was not talking about West Virginia despite getting in a bowl game. It was just a murky, bad year, even though West Virginia got into a bowl game. And I know they had a lot of injuries and were trying new players out, which is part of why they lost in that Guaranteed Rate Bowl, but it didn't feel good at all. So that season to occur before the schedule gets tough, before you lose a lot of players, even though you bring JT in and Dante Stills is still there, you didn't know he was going to still be around. That I think if Neil Brown had last year, if you would take the COVID bowl win and then have last year in 2021 be a 7 or 8 win season, and you get into a little better bowl game and win that, and then this year is a 5 or 6 win year, it's not going to feel good. It's going to be hard to trust the climb, but I would be able to argue to you, let's give another year to Neil Brown because this schedule was tougher. Let's see what happens next time. And when he had the horses with the same team, he at least did climb it up to a reasonable expectation. And if, let's see what happens. But that year, that cushion's not there.
Exactly.
Like the track record's not there. So now it's just up and, roller coaster ride of up and down, and it's mostly been down recently. So the boat was missed last year. Last year should have at least been a 7-win season.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Mike, that I hadn't really thought about because, we all live in the moment.
Yeah.
But real quick before we get to that, I want to touch on, I know you're a media member, so you're not going to talk speculation, I'm sure. But there's been a lot of, I'm a YouTuber. I can talk about what I want.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I do try to be respectful and do things the right way. But I have been pushing for Brown to go and for us to try to get Hugh Freeze.
I've seen that,
blasting it on Twitter and everything else.
Yeah.
Apparently Hugh Freeze, according to Matthew Swanson and several other comments, apparently Hugh Freeze just signed a contract extension with Liberty through 2030. So my gut feeling is his agent was leaking all that stuff out there to get him a raise and an extension.
Probably. It is interesting that he would want to be at a non-Power 5 that long if he's having success where he is, even though there obviously was a scandal before. Right. So that's interesting to me that he'd want to lock himself in. And he might have been posturing for more money, but if I were him and his agent, even if he doesn't want to be the head coach of West Virginia, I would think I could get him a better job.
Oh, you can.
Than Liberty.
Yeah. So I had actually heard recently through a source I have who knows somebody at the school at Liberty.
Okay. At Liberty. Okay.
Yeah. That he was planning on leaving next year, but
And honestly though, contracts don't really matter as much as they used to. Yeah, so it's not like
that's very
not
true.
Like if he gets Liberty into a 12-team playoff or something like that, it's not like he can't get out, or maybe if he wants. Next year would obviously be would be weird now, but contracts don't mean what they did. Long term is odd, but
that's a great point. And I did hear him say in an interview not long ago that his goal is to get Liberty into the 12-team college football playoff. So if he feels like, and he says he's really happy there, he's converted to Christianity. He's apparently a devout Christian now. He's happy being at Liberty.
Hey, maybe it's they're
quality a lot, and he's making $4 million a year. It's not like he's making chump change.
Right. And you're going to have a situation with a 12-team playoff. Now you're going to have a lot of runners up for Power 5. Obviously, it's not just going to be conference champs. You may have them, but if Notre Dame would have a 1-loss season with their schedule, they're probably going to be part of a top 12. If you have this SEC mess that we're discussing with Georgia, Bama, and Tennessee, and even Ohio State and Michigan, all 5 of them would get into a top 12 playoff. And then maybe even freaking Ole Miss and Penn State would have a chance, because if Penn State goes through a year in the Big Ten with 2 losses and they're both to Ohio State and Michigan, but they beat everybody else, they're probably going to have a case getting in. TCU or whoever wins the Big 12 would probably get in. I don't know if the Big 12 would get 2 teams in. The runner-up in the Big 12 would probably have a hard time, just like the runner-up in the Pac-12. But occasionally, if you go undefeated as a group of 5, even though your schedule is going to be a little lesser, you might get a bump into that top 12. So maybe he's also thinking that I'm making the money now, and it might actually be easier to get into the playoff if I can be the best group of 5 team versus being a West Virginia, where you're probably looking at trying to be number 2 or 3 in your conference.
Right.
So, that's a whole, it'll be interesting. It'll also be interesting where the Mountaineers are and what the expectations are, because we're talking about the last 10 years and even the history. When Oklahoma and Texas are out of the Big 12, if you're looking at historic programs, fan base wise, eyeballs wise, media market wise, because you are bringing Pittsburgh and that is a top 25 media market. You're even bringing DC a little bit if you're West Virginia, and that's a big media market as well. You could argue that West Virginia, right there probably with Oklahoma State in terms of history. Yeah. If you're talking about media market wise, it would be West Virginia and maybe Cincinnati. Yeah. In terms of size, you could argue UCF because of money and eyeballs and what they're doing down there in Orlando. So if you take Texas and Oklahoma out of things, then maybe you should beef it up a little bit and expect West Virginia to be at least a top 3, if not vie for the conference title more than once a decade, maybe at least twice or 3 times.
And I agree with that.
Who knows?
Yes, totally. Yeah, and because honestly, if West Virginia was in the position, in my opinion, we should be in. And that's on the rise, right? On the way up, climbing.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that right now. Yeah.
If we were in that spot, I would feel really. I mean, like we used to be. I would say, hey, West Virginia should be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the new Big 12 year in, year out. At least in the top half of the league every single year. In
the new Big 12, you take Oklahoma and Texas out of there.
Right. But now I'm like, I mean, my God, UCF may pass us. Cincinnati's, you could argue they've already passed us, maybe.
Yeah.
They're not playing the same schedule we are, so, it's hard to judge that. But
yeah, we'll see what those teams do with a Big 12 schedule where there's 3 ranked teams a year, because UCF's 2017 year, they only played one ranked team in that whole schedule, and they played Memphis twice. So they're going to have at least 3 ranked teams in the conference, regardless of what they do out of conference. I would imagine they're not going to go undefeated ever again. They may, they might have special years, but they're going to see in terms of reasonable expectations. Cincinnati and UCF and BYU are probably looking at once a decade contending for a conference title, twice a decade, maybe having a chance at the playoff, and most likely losing at least 3 or 4 games. Yeah. We'll see. But West Virginia should at minimum be in that same boat. And it does feel like right now that they're in a little bit of a lesser boat that's looking like they're not even making bowl games. Yeah. More than a couple times in a 4 or 5 year stretch, which that is a problem. And there's so many bowl games out there. I mean, you gotta. I mean, 6 wins is 500 football. It's not impressive, but you should be able to get in a bowl game.
I agree
on a regular basis.
That should be the bare minimum.
Right.
I'm not saying you can't let one losing season every once in a while.
Yeah, Dana had it, and people forget about it now. Right. That's not going to right.
It's not like I'm not saying you can never have a losing season.
Yeah,
but you should never have, and you should never, in my opinion, you shouldn't even be 6-6 2 years in a row. You should be, 6-6. Okay, here's what we need to go fix. And here's the problem.
If you're 6-6, you better win the bowl game too to finish with a 7th win.
Right. 6-7. That's a losing record. That's bad.
Last year was a losing record. Yeah.
Yeah. What bothers me so bad is not the fact that we're losing; it's the way we're losing.
That's true.
I mean, obviously the Kansas game, everybody thought the world was on fire because we lost to Kansas. Well, then we realized that Kansas is a lot better than we thought. So it kind of made you feel a little better about it. I mean, it's still not good because you're like, well, here's this guy that's only been at this school a year and a half. And they're already better than we are. That's not good. But you're like, well, okay, things happen. It is what it is. They play a different style of offense, and well, then you go out and play. Basically, don't show up in the first half against Texas,
right?
And it's like, okay, what's going on? And it's not just that. The players at times look like they don't know where to line up. They don't know what to do. I mean, we're 7 games into the season, and That's not something.
Yeah.
That's not a problem, in my opinion, that you should be having 7 games into the season.
No, and then you have, and I even wrote about this. I was trying to be fair to Neil Brown, so I wasn't just a media member bashing the man every day.
Mm-hmm.
That after the Baylor win, even though Texas was as bad as it was, and it is not just losing, but how you lose. Texas Tech, yeah, they lost a few times. They are a good team. They're at least as good as West Virginia. So if West Virginia would have lost to Texas Tech by 2 points, it's unfortunate to lose after a quality win, but it wouldn't feel the same way it does now, where they weren't even competitive at all in the game.
Yeah.
Texas almost beat Alabama. I mean, if they didn't lose to Texas Tech, they probably would be a ranked team still and maybe can get back in the rankings before the end of the year. They're going to have better recruits than you. They're freaking Texas. If they beat you by a couple points or even a touchdown, all right, it's on the road. You lose C.J. Donaldson in the middle of the game. It's not the end of the world. But again, you're out of it from Jump Street. So that makes you feel like not only are they a higher level program, they are Texas and the brand's higher, but man, people were making fun of Texas not being back, and West Virginia is losing by 18 points. Where's West Virginia at? So that's, and then the middle part though, you have the Texas game. Okay. You lose to Kansas. Jalen Daniels is better than anybody thought. He's out now, which is part of them losing. They're better than people thought. Pitt's not that good, but at the time they were a ranked team. You cover the spread. They're the defending ACC champ. Okay, those 2 losses, I don't feel good, but they're not the end of the world. And then the Texas game, that's a bad loss because even though they're Texas, it's just a bad loss the way that went down. But then after the Baylor game, I felt better about the program. Mm-hmm. They showed up. They did what they had to do. They won. They finally forced turnovers, which they hadn't done all season long, really. They did exactly what the coaches told us. If you watch any of the press conferences going into the week, exactly what the coaches wanted is exactly what they did. Mm-hmm. It's exactly how they won the game. They fit a blueprint for playing Baylor, and they managed to win that game. So, okay, you feel good. And I think Neil Brown felt good. I actually think that game kind of made me think to myself, because I had him on the hot seat entering this season, that, okay, after the Baylor win, I did, and I wrote about it. I thought, okay, he's not winning. There's not a climb here, but that team's really playing for this man. Like, why? That's a good win for a coach who everyone wants fired. Maybe give him another year. But then you turn around and go ahead and have the game at Texas Tech. And I think even now, and if you listen to Neil after the game, I don't think it's so much about trusting his climb or trusting him. I don't think he trusts the team. I think Neil Brown was surprised on how bad they were in that game as well. I don't think he trusts his own players, which at that point, nobody's trusting anybody. And it almost felt like after that game that he might want to leave. So that was the worst. I honestly think the Texas Tech loss is the worst loss for the program under Neil Brown. And you could argue in the last 5 or 8 years. Just because it's right after a big win. It's year 4 of a coach. You weren't in the game the whole way through. And you didn't do it to Oklahoma, who's at least a national power usually. Texas Tech is a program that you should beat occasionally. And now, 4 years in a row losing to Texas Tech? They shouldn't be that much better than you on a regular basis.
Yeah. I want to get to some of these comments real quick. Guys, if you want me to see your comments, or if you got a question for Mike and you want to make sure we see it, because there's a lot of people in the chat, you can drop a super chat donation and it'll highlight it, and I'll be able to read it. But it says Blue Hawk 71 says, who's a channel member? Thank you for that. Give that $16 million to players to come to West Virginia. Well, schools can't pay players, so I don't think
directly. Not directly. You can do it with NIL.
Country Roads Trust can,
right,
but they can't.
But that buyout sucks. I mean, I don't get that. I think that's the one thing that goes against Shane Lyons. I don't understand how you just win a mediocre bowl game. You're climbing a little bit. Those buyout figures of 20 mil, then 16.7 mil. I mean, that is national power level buyout. That's insane. I don't think Neil Brown probably thought that was coming his way before it was offered. I mean that.
Yeah, I read last night on the 24/7's. Sorry to advertise for one of your competitors, but I read on one of the message boards last night that Kelly Zinn is actually the one who negotiated that contract.
Okay, I mean that's whoever it did.
But
I mean that's just nuts.
Somebody probably had to sign off on it. Wouldn't you think?
You would think.
because she's not the AD. She was the assistant AD or whatever.
The AD should sign
AD.
off on it. Right. 100%.
Somebody had to sign off on it. And she's gone now. And I had heard through the grapevine that she was pretty good at her job, and which makes me question that now. But and I think her and Neil, worked well together. So, with her being gone now, does he still want to stick around even? You know what I'm saying?
I know that Shane and Neil really are in lockstep. I've heard those exact words from people that are close to the program, that Shane Lyons and Neil Brown are in quote unquote lockstep with each other. And that was part of why Neil Brown had pretty much carte blanche for after the Vic Koenig situation went down. Shane Lyons basically left it up to Neil Brown on what to do. And he had only been there a couple years at the time. So that is kind of rare to just basically say, whatever you want, I'm going to support. So, and the AD kind of should be involved in that scenario. So I guess a criticism, if what you're saying is true in terms of an assistant AD basically having carte blanche over a negotiation for a contract, a head coach having complete control over who stays and who goes and who gets blamed and what players there and who gets fired, then you're the AD. The buck is going to stop with you, regardless of where you're giving people these opportunities at control. The argument then could exist that you don't want to rule with an iron fist where no one wants to be there, I guess, in today's day and age. But for me, if I'm going to go down with a ship and I'm going to have everybody saying it's my fault, I at least want to be, like, if I'm in a car crash, I want to be the man driving rather than be the passenger. So it's nice that he's giving everybody a control, but maybe a criticism is that he's not ruling enough with his control. I mean, if I say, you go ahead as my subordinate, you negotiate this deal, I trust you, you're closer with this person, and then you come back to me and he's there for 2 years with one bowl win in a losing season, and you're telling me 16.7 after 4 years, which is usually a bar for a lot of programs, I would say, I'm going to have to veto this, and we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. The buck still has to stop with you, and maybe there's too much control that Shane Lyons is giving up. But they are close. They are friends. I know for sure that Shane Lyons wants Neil Brown to be successful. He would prefer that. I would think, honestly, and I said this too, that anyone involved with the program, I know this for sure, anybody involved with the program, any fan of the program at the time of the hiring, and really any media member at the time of the hiring, and even former players, if you go back 4 years, everybody wanted this to work, and everybody thought it would work. Yep. The harshest critics of Neil Brown right now, 4 years ago, if you get in Google, were all about the move. Oh. He fit culturally. Yeah, well, me too. But I mean, even others that I won't mention. Right, he fit culturally. Kentucky, West Virginia, really, really close. Fit culturally. He walked off the plane and had a relationship with Don Nalen. Dana didn't do that. I know for sure a lot of other former players, a lot of all-time great players, they said to me personally, and they've now said this publicly, that they didn't feel welcome at the program under Dana Holgorsen for whatever reason. Some of it is weird, but like Rasheed Marshall lives in Pittsburgh. It's an hour away. He told me he didn't feel welcome to drive an hour south and go to a game for 8 years. That's ludicrous.
I've heard it from others.
Yeah, and Neil and Pat McAfee said that too. Mm-hmm. And Neil Brown got in there and immediately fixed all that. And he literally, this isn't exaggeration, he literally got on his cell phone and asked, Rasheed told me, he literally received a phone call on his personal phone from Neil Brown, as well as several others did, and just said, I don't know what your situation is, but you're welcome to come down here. So, and then he started coming down there. And that's why you see pictures of him wearing the Big 12 jersey that he never played with. So all of that. And Pat McAfee said the same thing. So everybody was on board initially and really wanted it to work out, all the way from Shane Lyons on down to fans, media, and players. It just has not worked out, unfortunately. And it is a results-based business, but it made sense at the time culturally and all of that. And, it just hasn't worked out.
And I'll tell you, here's what I've.
And he's a really, really nice guy. I would love if they went out. Yes. And he is a really, really nice freaking man.
Almost every fan I know thinks that. I mean, I like him. I've met him. I went to one of the coaches' caravans. I've met him, shook his hand. I mean, he checks every single box you want in your coach.
Yeah.
Except
I
when
felt
he got,
bad asking him a tough question the other day. Like he's a nice dude. Like
yeah, and he wasn't happy with your question either.
no, yeah, he was not. But I mean, he's a nice guy.
You're doing your job, but no, that's
Yeah.
all. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we all want him to succeed, but at the end of the day, I mean, and even I've talked to some former players; they're not
Yeah.
happy. A lot of them were not happy.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say a lot. Some of them were not happy about his decision to pick Jordan Leslie over Jamal Adai. I think that was a decision that's getting scrutinized now, especially when you look at the defense that's on the field right now.
Yeah.
You know, almost every decision he has made, or I shouldn't say almost, but
And I've seen a lot of
decisions-
fans, they didn't like the answer that Jordan Leslie gave me on my question a few weeks ago about what he evaluates the defense. And he basically said, I don't care about points and yards. And it's not the only D coordinator that thinks that way, but yeah, fans didn't like that much.
They didn't, but I watched it. I mean, I knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
His point is main things don't keep him from scoring points, right? That's
Right.
your
Right.
But so I kind of know what he was saying. Those I've discovered, and I guess maybe every coach does this to an extent, but they will take every question and spin it.
Oh yeah.
To be positive. It doesn't matter what you ask them.
Oh sure.
Because everything's got to be sunshine and rainbows all the time. But anyway,
I guess like what else would you do though? I mean, if you're in the situation, you just walk in there and say like, yeah, it's real bad. I don't know how we're gonna fix this thing. That the vibes then gonna I mean the vibes then gonna trickle down to be real negative. I mean, a lot of the players have talked about the JT Daniels is so even keel that even in the midst of that Kansas game, he just doesn't care. So that's what in the leader, you have to have that. I don't think that always existed. I think having that is a positive. Like maybe not every player reacts the same way. I don't know. I mean, I do see a lot of people. Interesting your take on this, because I see a lot of people bringing up a lot of the injuries. Do you believe there's any built-in excuses that exist right now? Because we talked about the schedule always going to be tough for this year, and last year was a missed opportunity of that being a poor season off the climb. But I did something on this. I don't know if you saw this. I mean, if Charles Woods would have played against Kansas and Texas healthy, maybe you beat Kansas. Do you get blown out as bad against Texas? I mean, they picked apart the Mountaineers secondary in a lot of these losses, and he's the only real veteran that was a star player on that secondary.
I agree, but
they've had some bad injuries.
That's fair, and that's fair. But here's my rebuttal to that.
And then Tony Mathis out now.
Right. Yeah, my rebuttal to that is this: if you have to rely on one player to be good on that side of the ball, you're in trouble.
Yeah, in the secondary they really were. Yeah.
And there's reasons for that. Number one, all the transfers, which at the time I was like, no big deal. They're going to, because they said they were replacing them with guys that were better. I'm like, okay, great. Those guys potentially were locker room issues. Maybe I had heard through the grapevine that some of them were, cliquish, and so I'm like, okay, good. He's developing better chemistry, getting more athletic guys.
Yeah. And Messidor had kind of personal things that weren't nothing to do with football in terms of the campus that I've heard as well that I won't go into. But I think he thought his personal would maybe be better somewhere else.
Right. So, I mean, but when I look back on it now, I'm thinking, okay, number one, he should have probably not either let those guys get away or created an environment where they didn't want to leave. Number one.
Yeah.
So that's on him.
It has to be on you, even though we're in a weird
two, when they do leave,
transfer situation.
You can't. The fact that they thought they could replace them with all these FCS and Group of Five guys and be as good,
right?
I think was a miss.
Yeah, because they did retool the secondary with some veterans, but they're veterans from North Dakota State or from Group of Five or FCS. And yes, the resumes are good, but this is a different level of ball in terms of who they're going to be facing on the other side. So, yeah, I mean, the one thing that that Neil had to do, that the weirdest part about this year, the one thing that I think everybody agreed that West Virginia had to do last year to this year that didn't happen last year, which is why it dipped, is upgrade the quarterback position. 2 years ago, it was okay with Daggy, and then he regressed. Yep. And where the quarterback regresses, the team regresses, and that's why they didn't win 7 or 8 games. They only won the 6 because he really regressed last year. That, at the end of the day, there's a lot of other problems, but he regressed. He did not get better, and Neil Brown maybe stuck with his personal guy a little bit long.
Yep.
So that's been a big fan criticism.
Yep.
So everybody wanted him to fix that no matter what happened personally. And Neil Brown basically did what the fans wanted. He pretty much divorced himself of Jared Dagey. He really basically killed the man's college career. He's having to transfer left and right after that. Didn't care, had to divorce it. And he brought in a quality transfer in JT Daniels that when he brought him in, everyone that was predicting 8 wins was bringing up JT Daniels as why. You pair him with Graham Harrell, he's going to give you 4,000 yards. He's going to do what he was supposed to do with Georgia or even USC if he was fully healthy. He's never really been fully healthy, a former top 5 recruit out of high school at the time. He was a 5-star. So, and Keaton Slovis, who went to Pitt, was the other one that was brought up a little bit, but a lot of people wanted JT even over Keaton Slovis.
Yep.
So you get who you want. And if you can't get Slovis, you get the next best guy in JT Daniels. Narduzzi said he thought JT was just basically a pro player. He raved about him after the brawl and even going in. And yet that hasn't made a difference wins and loss wise. And he played really bad against Texas Tech, but even in the games that he's played well in, their defense has let down the offense. The defense had been good for several years, but now the defense is letting down the offense. So even though you fix the QB position the exact way that fans wanted you to, it doesn't matter wins and loss wise if you can't stop anybody.
Yeah, I agree. And got a comment here that says, does Nico transfer if Neil is gone, or is he here for the long haul? What do you think?
So that's interesting, and I think this is a take that I'm glad a fan brought this up so it didn't have to be me, because people will say this is an annoying side of it, because I know that the majority of fans now do want to move on. I think that's kind of a majority of fans, I would say. But as you know, from following college sports as long as you probably have had, there is an other end of things that makes it's not like the NFL. Firing a head coach is very complicated. And I do believe he'll be back next year. It'll be because of the buyout, probably a recruiting class that actually is good coming up. They got a quarterback commit just the other day. They're getting commits and players, and Rodney Gallagher's tweeting up a storm about how he loves West Virginia. He knows he's watching them lose, but he wants to come in. So they are solid recruiting wise, and the buyout's what it is. I do think he'll be back. But the other end of it, which might be part of the meeting that him and Shane Lyons will have at the end of the year, is if you fire a head coach, regardless of what the record's been and what the situation is and what the standard should be, and maybe that you should move on, you could lose your 2 things. Number one, your future recruiting classes that are now top 30. Rivals you bring up has West Virginia's upcoming recruiting class, I believe, at 27. This is a down program at 27 with not even stability in the conference. That's good. Even if they drop to 35, that's really, really good. Yeah.
So the other service has them at 32, I think.
Okay, but at the end of the day,
it's still a good class for us.
Yeah. 32, 27, 35, 38, any of that number. If you're in, I would say the top 35, definitely. I could argue top 40 based on how down the program's been. That's a good situation.
I agree.
So you could because these kids, Rodney Gallagher, Jaheim White, Stone, Sean Boyle, etc. I'm an alum of WVU. You're a fan of the Mountaineers. They're not coming because they've been rooting for West Virginia for 20 plus years and they love the program. Right. They're coming because they think this coaching staff can make them better players, can maybe get them to the next level, can get their game to another level. Jaheim White has literally said he is coming to West Virginia because of Neil Brown and Graham Harrell. Yeah. Graham Harrell's not a West Virginia guy. Neil Brown's on the hot seat. If Graham Harrell chooses to leave because you fouled Neil Brown, or Graham Harrell gets a head coaching job at another school because you don't give him one at West Virginia, Jaheim White could easily say with the transfer portal, I'm sorry. Now nothing I wanted to come is there. So you could be losing the recruits that you have of this solid recruiting class. And if he doesn't come, him and Gallagher are friends. They're liking everybody's tweets. Maybe Rodney doesn't come. You're really risking a lot if you do fire a coach and these recruits coming in for that coach. And then the other end of it is, you bring up Nico, is players that are there now, because there were people, and I thought bringing in JT Daniels made a lot of sense. You're in year 4 now. You got to climb the program. Okay, there's pressure. You can't wait around. This isn't 1980s football anymore. LaDon Allen could wait and do a project. You can't do that anymore. He's a top-rated kid. You bring him in. However, there were some people, I had some friends that did say, you know what, this program's not really going to win that much anyway. I don't like the move, because what if this makes Nico transfer? Does he want to? JT could come back next year. What if Nico says, I don't want to sit for 2 years. I don't care who he is. And then I'm going to transfer. So that was a risk of bringing him in. And then if you take away the head coach that sold him, I mean, Nico was recruited by Neil Brown pretty much exclusively personally, where Neil was flying down there to sit in the literal living room during COVID. So if you take away that coach that Nico's family has a great relationship with, does Nico choose to transfer? You have JT come back and Neil Brown gone. Nico could definitely choose to transfer. You could have all of these quarterbacks choose to leave. You could have CJ Donaldson could leave. I actually had that. I never thought he would want to go anywhere because he hasn't even been a running back before this year. But when I was on the Sirius XM Big 12 show, they actually asked me, do you think that's a risk of losing a player who's a freshman like CJ Donaldson? Another school, I'm sure, is watching what we're watching and saying, well, he's really good. I can plug him in too. This is the downside of the transfer portal. Even though there's an upside that you can add players to, you can also lose them quick. So I get that it's 4 years in. I get the standard should be higher than this. I get you got to send a message. I get you got to stabilize yourself as a program with conference chaos and realignment. But with the buyout the way it is and the fact that you could lose, if I would almost want to get the pulse of that before I make the decision. Like I would almost kind of want to have some private meetings with Nico, with Rodney Gallagher after they graduate high school. You might not be able to do it now, and be like, look, if we move on, what are you doing?
Yep.
And I, if Rodney Gallagher and Jaheim White tell me that they're not coming, if Neil Brown is not there, I might be convinced to give another season.
I'll be honest with you. I saw that tweet. And by the way, Shrewsbury Honeycomb, I am not going to the game tomorrow. I have other things on the docket tomorrow that I have to take care of. But and cause somebody else had asked me that too, so I wanted to address it. But Jaheim White, back to the Jaheim White tweet. Anytime you fire a coach, that's a risk that you lose recruits. I mean, it's just part of the business. So you've got to make a decision. Okay, is it worth losing a few recruits to get to stabilize the program long term? But the way I took Jaheim White, because he tweeted that out of the blue.
I didn't tweet to him. That was just totally out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, he tweeted that on his own Twitter, just boom. And to me, the only reason he would do that is probably because he saw, I'm sure he follows a lot of people.
Yeah,
he's
sending a message.
Saw the negativity around the coach.
Right.
So he wanted to show his support, right? To me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, and I have a tendency to do that sometimes, but maybe he looked at that, and so when I look at that, I'm thinking I don't know that he would put that out there if he didn't. I think he'd leave if Neil Brown leaves, I guess is where I'm getting at, because I don't think if he didn't feel that way, I don't think he would put that tweet out there.
Again, and I've not asked him personally outside of that Twitter interaction. I don't know. I mean, I talked a little bit to him, but I don't know that to be, I'm not in his mind. I don't know him personally. Right. I don't know why he put that out there. I can't say what he's going to do. However, I think that's a fair thing to read in, because Rodney Gallagher didn't like it and he didn't comment on it. And pretty much every other tweet that either one of them put up, they're liking each other's tweets. They're commenting on each other's tweets, and they're quote tweeting each other and how we're going to join forces. Rodney left that one alone. So that maybe tells me that maybe he's a little bit more locked in. I mean, if you look at what Rodney Gallagher is trying to do with his whole social media empire and trying to clearly get an NIL deal coming up, his sister has basically become his social media manager, and they got West Virginia logos on things. But again, with the transfer, nothing would surprise me. If we wake up tomorrow and both of them, if West Virginia gets blown out coming up and say they lose out and they miss a bowl game, or they win a couple games, they just miss a bowl game, and the next day, both of them decommit, I'm not going to be blown away with shock. Nothing surprises me anymore. Unfortunately, that's the way we're in. But I could see reading things into that. I mean, I don't know. Because I also would think that a lot of high school kids that are so active on Twitter, I mean, they're just as active as we are, if not more, that they are probably careful of what they say. Like, they have managers, they have fathers, they have mothers, they have families. As I mentioned, Rodney's sister. I would guess that if Jaheim White put that out there haphazardly at lunch or in the middle of practice in high school, and it wasn't to send a message, that somebody in his family would have maybe tried to get him to delete it or I would have got a message saying, take your article down. Like none of that happened. I'll say they have no problem with anything that has been up. So it does lead me to believe there might have been, I don't know, a message that was put up there. I mean, I don't know.
Justin Benton, the defensive tackle that we were able to steal away from Georgia, or at least got a commitment away from Georgia. I saw the other day, he's taking a visit to Arkansas now.
Yeah, people are taking offers.
Now, was he planning on doing that anyway? I don't know, but I'm telling you, man, and
the glass half full take is you do get Sean Boyle was committed already to Charlotte than he does, but I will say he does have the mother connection that's a WVU alum.
Yeah, so he grew up a WVU fan, so I think he may come here anyway. But there's going to be some of those. There's a lot of kids who want to go. A lot, and I read on another message board yesterday, and I don't know who put it out there. I don't know if they know what they're talking about, but probably just a fan. But they said that. Kids come to the school for the school, not the coach. But I don't know that I agree with that.
I think they used to. Yeah,
I actually think it's the other way around because they all have aspirations of getting to the league, and it's not the school that gets them to the league; it's the coaches. I think that's how I view it.
I mean, I think the real thing is every kid is different. And I do have a policy just in general, certainly once it gets to the end of the season and really it's all about commitments and recruiting, that any kid who makes a decision on what's best for him, whatever the reason, it's hard for me to criticize it and say that he shouldn't have made that decision or it was a wrong decision. That's their decision. That's their life. It's a big deal to them. So I always do, fans do run amok sometimes. You do kind of try to ask that, hey, if Rodney Gallagher would tweet tomorrow that he's decommitting and then all of a sudden he commits to Pitt, that sucks. I could see being upset, but the vitriol that sometimes get delivered is a bit nuts as well, because it's their personal decisions. Whatever they want to do with their life, it's up to them. But I do believe that every recruit nowadays, more than ever before, they're going to schools, they're making decisions for a myriad of reasons. And they're all personal reasons. But I do believe if I had to rank it, I do believe that it is off of a relationship in terms of how they can be fit into a system and how they can perform, as well as liking the environment of the coaching staff, probably number one. And then there might be certain kids that go to certain schools that sometimes, again, I say I don't want to criticize kids' decisions, but I'm sure you've seen a kid make a decision out there. You see a 3-star kid or something say, I'm going to Alabama. And in reality, that's not a good decision.
Yeah.
Like Alabama's going to win you a national championship, probably. But how much are you going to play? And what is that going to do for your life if you actually want to make money playing the sport? You probably would be better off playing more minutes at West Virginia, even if you get in the middle of the pack of the Big 12 versus vying for a conference title in the SEC and winning the championship. So in those scenarios, kids sometimes do make decisions because they see a brand name and it's not the smartest decision out there. But I think coaching staff and personal relationships with a head coach, an offensive coordinator for an offensive player, a defensive coordinator for a defensive player, gigantic deals, unless you have a Sean Boyle thing, but gigantic deals. And even if a player has a family connection, we've seen players who have family connections that a coach gets fired and say, no, I don't want to be there again. I don't care what happened in 1973. I'm going to be there for the next 4 years with this guy that I don't know, because the concern could be, like, think of the scenario of Dana Holgerson taking over for Bill Stewart. So Bill Stewart was basically doing the same thing that Rich Rod did, and it was just basically the same offense, wash, rinse, and repeat. He was insistent under there before. He wasn't culturally trying to change anything. Okay, he was more offering motivational speeches and wasn't tinkering as much with what's going on, and it worked sometimes, but tinkering with what's going on system-wise. It worked out for Geno that his game went to a whole nother level, but there could have been players that when Dana comes in, that could be, do I fit into the air raid? I've been here for a few years. I got one more year left. I mean, they didn't have the transfer portal at that time, but you just got to, what people fit into, what exists, all that. And maybe you could save it. This is why the other end of this is, and I know this isn't as sexy as you Freeze and Matt Rule and some of the people that are always brought up on Twitter, but when you have those thoughts and those conversations, the fix could be that if you move on from Neil Brown, maybe you would give a serious consideration of promoting Graham Harrell to the job,
Mhm.
because maybe that would try to save your recruits. And I don't know if that was a message that was even being sent secretly. You want me to get really read into something? Jaheim White brought up he liked the coaching staff and mentioned Graham Harrell by name.
Okay.
So
See,
maybe
I don't know that I saw that part.
yeah, that was in another tweet that was separate to the one directly to me. But he's mentioned Graham Harrell, of liking Graham Harrell. I think Rodney's even mentioned Graham Harrell a lot. And I know Graham Harrell, Sean Boyles mentioned Graham Harrell. That actually was in our story. Sean Boyles mentioned Graham Harrell in an interview that we actually did with him directly. So obviously Sean Boyle has a family connection, but you're coming for a head coach. But are you more sold on the coordinator because that's the system you're playing in, or would you be saved if you have the coordinator still there? I mean, the offense was horrible against Texas Tech, so anybody that was riding the Graham Harrell train obviously probably needs to see more. But he's a young offensive mind. He does run more of a balanced offense than just the air raid, and a lot of those recruits do like him. They might like a guy who's only 37 years old. He's not. I mean. He's maybe he would understand them more culturally. Granted, Neil Brown's not that old, but maybe they would prefer that than Hugh Freeze, who I don't know. Maybe they think Hugh Freeze is going to come in, preach the Bible, and they'd much rather have Graham Harrell.
And you know what? I thought about that too. That's partially what got Vic Kenning in trouble.
Yeah, right.
That was part of the equation. He was allegedly trying to push his Christian views on some of the players. A specific player in general, specifically,
right,
and that player didn't like it because he was a different religion, and he basically felt like because that was his coach, it made him feel pressured. So,
yeah, a lot of fans may like it at West Virginia, but a lot of players may not like that type of.
And at the end of the day, who's got to perform on the field is the players. So if the players aren't happy, they're either not going to play well or they're going to transfer.
Yeah,
it's that simple. But talking about recruits, Swabby Guns does bring up a good point. He says you may also acquire new fresh recruits depending on the new head coach hire.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
and that's a good point. Yeah,
it depends, and it depends on who you're there. And this is a fact. JT Daniels does no connection to West Virginia outside of now playing for the Mountaineers. Yeah. He literally has said that Graham Harrell was a major factor in coming to West Virginia. He liked Neil Brown, of course. They met, but he told Sirius that I don't believe if Graham Harrell was not with West Virginia that JT Daniels would be with West Virginia.
I heard him. He was on. I actually ran across a podcast that I had never heard of, but I don't remember who. I don't even know the name of it. But they interviewed JT Daniels just a few weeks ago, a few months ago, after he had already made the move.
Yeah,
and they asked him, and he basically said this: when I entered the portal, he said, obviously, your phone's blowing up. You see all these numbers you don't recognize. And he said, when Graham's number came across my phone, I already knew it because I had him saved in there where I played for him. He said it automatically put West Virginia in the top 3 of my list.
Yeah,
just because of it was Graham Harrell, and I already knew him.
Right. So that's the guy coming for a coach,
and he doesn't want to. He at this point in his career, he didn't want to go play and learn a whole new offense. Probably.
Yeah.
Plus, he trusted Graham, and they had a connection. So.
So
I wouldn't hate bringing Graham Harrell in or promoting him. I wouldn't hate that. But the only thing I worry about is, and of course, Graham's going. If they do that, he'll probably bring in his own staff anyway. But
you would figure.
I'm sure some of the staff members that are on there now wouldn't care too much for that. But he's probably going to bring his own in anyway. So it may not matter. But anyway.
I mean, I will say, from just dealing with him press conference wise, I think the negative of fans wouldn't like is he does fit the young offensive mind that maybe would save some of the recruits. He might fit in with more of the players, even though he's also obviously not a West Virginia culture guy. And this is a guy that was from Texas and spent time at USC and North Texas, etc. But fans may not like his demeanor as a head coach. I think I like him as a coordinator in terms of he's very even keel. He comes in smiling all the time. They losing by 30 points. He's smiling. He's really fun to talk to. He every now and then it's like you're talking to somebody on a sitcom. Like he'll drop like a subtle joke, but not even like sell the punchline. Like he's very like laid back. I think like having a beer would be fun with Graham Harrell. He's very laid back. But I could see as a head coach, people might be like, man, like, I actually had to kick you in the tail a little bit here. Like it almost is like he doesn't care. He's so laid back.
I actually had that exact conversation with Mountaineer Paul. He and I were talking the other day
Okay.
about the same
He's a good
topic.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about how Graham Harrell's person. I think it was Mountaineer Paul, but his personality just doesn't come across as a head coach type
Right.
personality, right? Now that doesn't mean he can't do it. I mean, Dana Holgerson's personality is completely opposite of Neil Brown's. I mean, you can't get more different.
Sure.
And they've both had some success as head coaches.
Yeah.
Neil Brown talking about his days at Troy and whatnot, and
Yeah.
and some a little bit of success he's had here, but Dana's complete opposite of Neil. But he found ways. He just had his own unique way of doing things.
And Neil, I guess Neil is similar to Graham in that personality way, but at least he experienced being a head coach before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Graham Dick, I have been a proponent of the move, but I could see that as a negative, and that would be interesting if he could handle, everything that comes with being a head coach, which is much more than being a coordinator. And how it would even, I don't know, maybe it was something he doesn't even want to do. Maybe he doesn't want that stress. Maybe he doesn't want that headache. I don't know. I mean, he's a family man. He's very, very laid back. His personality is the exact same, no matter what's going on in the game. You ask him about, about this play or about this moment or what something, he give you like, I could see that. Yeah, we could try that out. It's like, okay. So like, I don't know if those answers are going to work as a head coach.
Yeah, but he might change if he became a head coach too. He may adjust his.
Yeah, everyone has to.
You know what I'm saying? The way.
Yeah, I mean, every year you have to get. It's hard in any walk of life to be able to say somebody can't have a certain job because they've never done it before. You got to have a first time for everything. So exactly. He's not that old. So yeah. I would interview him. I think if they don't interview him, that's insanity. I would definitely interview him.
Because I think at some point in his career, Graham Harrell will be a head coach.
I would be a little nervous that if they do move on from Brown, and again, I think they're not going to move on from Brown. I do think he will be back unless it's like they literally don't win any more games. But I think, and it might even be regardless. I think at the end of this year, Graham Harrell will get looked at and interviewed if he wants one for a head coaching position somewhere. And if it's like a North Texas or a lower level like that, he does actually have a connection there, for example.
Right.
He may say, no, I'd rather stay with the Power 5. He might even think to himself, Neil Brown's in the hot seat. I'll do this another year, and then I'll get interviewed a year from now. But maybe it'll be above that. Maybe he'll take a head coaching opportunity that hasn't been offered before. I think a phone call will be made. I mean, I don't think Jordan Leslie ever screams as getting a head coach offer, but I think Graham Harrell may.
Well, Jordan Leslie was actually close to getting the job at Troy last year, from my understanding. At least that's what I read in some reports.
That's true, I guess, in the future. But yeah, that would be.
But he went to Troy, I think, didn't he? So, and he coached there. So is any other school going to want him to be their coach?
Right. He's a Brown disciple as well. Graham Harrell. I was surprised Graham Harrell was. I mean, Graham Harrell and JT Daniels have no West Virginia connection at all. They had no connection to Neil Brown. They have no connection to anybody. They've never even been near the state, probably. I bet you all my money neither one of them had ever stepped foot in the state of West Virginia prior to this season, outside of maybe recruiting or a game or something like that. JT definitely never had. I don't think Graham would have had. Well, maybe back in the day at under Leach or something, maybe. But regardless, they have no connection at all. Maybe from him being a Tech would be the only chance.
Yeah, so I was say the Tech connection, maybe. I'm not sure where the years overlap there.
I don't think they. I still think no, but that would be the only chance there if there was an overlap with the Big 12. Because Graham Harrell was so young that maybe 2013 he still would have been there.
But they have mutual connections. Yeah, but they do have mutual connections. They're from the same coaching tree. They coached with a lot of the same guys.
Right.
Matter of fact, Matt Moore coached Graham Harrell, if I'm not mistaken, at Texas Tech, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean,
but anyway, back to your point. But your point is,
my point is they came clearly to try to better their personal careers, feeling like they bought. I guess I'll simply put it this way: Graham Harrell and JT Daniels bought whatever West Virginia
and
Neil Brown were selling them. Mm-hmm. It might have been a bill of goods. I mean, right now they might be thinking to themselves, I didn't sign up for this, but they bought whatever was being sold. And I would imagine, without being in the room, that unlike Sean Boyle that we mentioned, who the second that he got a West Virginia offer, he basically is committing within a day. And his other offer was Charlotte. It was a lower level program. So that probably wasn't that hard to get him to commit, and he probably would be locked in regardless. Who knows? He's a 3-star kid, I believe, so it's not like he's going to get an abundance of Power 5 offers from Bama and USC and Oklahoma, etc. But I would imagine that there would have had to be a sales pitch. There's no way that Neil Brown and even Shane Lyons, if he was involved in any way, were walking in the room and they're like, "Where can I sign up?" They were why should I come there? Like, they had to be sold on the opportunity, and they were sold. And I would imagine for next year, now maybe a player doesn't want to do this again, but I mean, that's a whole thing that's a can of worms with the freaking transfer portal you got to think about. Like, JT does not want to go to 4 schools in 5 years, but if Graham will get a head coaching opportunity or go somewhere else next year, does JT say, I want to do another year of college ball because I'm not yet ready to try the next level, but Graham's not here any longer. We're not even good. I want to leave too. Like, and then it's just, there's a lot more that a head coach has to worry about than Don Nalen had to worry about or Rich Rod had to worry about. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. It's hard to be a head coach. This is why I think that depending on how the conferences realign themselves, and if this keeps moving, I'm pleasantly surprised that Bob Huggins is now okay with the transfer portal to bring players in, because I thought a couple years ago he would just retire.
I did too. I don't want because he hated it, and I actually heard him in an interview not long ago say, "I actually like it now." Of course.
Yeah, I did hear him say that. Yeah,
but he may change his mind if they end up being being bad again. But real quick, I'm gonna let you go here in a minute, Mike. We've been an hour and 20 minutes, and I know
I have enjoyed it. I got some time on Fridays fun. Usually.
I have liked it, but it's I'm sure we both have other things to do, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. But Big Dan T, who's one of my loyal supporters and actually a member of my channel, got a question here, and it kind of actually is a good segue from what you were just talking about, how things are different today. Yeah. You got to kind of add COVID in there too. He says, not sure if I agree or disagree, but is it fair, considering the COVID years, to judge Brown as a 4-year head coach, considering how the program was when he took over?
Yeah. Let me put you this way.
I found this on the web for how to program was when he took over. Check it
I'll see what Sirius's opinion is.
Let's see what Siri thinks about that.
See what Siri thinks. I think that I'll put you this way. If you're going to be on the side of moving on from Neil Brown, then that opinion exists this way. I like to think that I can argue both sides. I think sometimes politicians have an inability to argue the other side, and that's why we get some problems in our lives. But I think I can argue both sides of different things. So I will say that if you are sold on moving on from Neil Brown, then that opinion exists where you're willing to risk recruits. You're not hearing me. You don't care. You're willing to risk transfers. You're fed up with 4 years. It's not a climb. You got to set a standard. You don't think he should have got the job in the first place, probably, even if you were happy then. You're looking back in retrospect and saying Group of 5 and Power 5, it's different. You're not liking some of the answers. You probably feel that he flat out lied to me the other day, which you could argue if you look at his Twitter. He'd say he wasn't on social media. That's just not factually true. That's probably you if you want to fire Neil Brown right now. And you're willing to eat the buyout, which does exist as well. If you want to keep Neil Brown or at least give him more time, or you're not hating Neil Brown as much as some of the critics that do want to fire him, you're probably aware of the buyout. You're probably scared about transfers and recruits and them not coming aboard. And the excuse that exists for Neil Brown, exactly what Big Dan T brought up, that you are in year 4, but it's not a traditional year 4. That included a COVID year. It's included the advent of the transfer portal that did not exist when he got hired. So all of the situation that he agreed to might not have been what he expected to occur now. So a lot of this has changed, that he has to learn on the fly. And he's a little younger than, say, Bob Huggins, who might just want to retire, already a Hall of Famer. But it's hard. It is, a guy making $4 million a year, it's hard. No one's going to want to hear me say it's hard, but it is. That does exist. I mean, you're having to adapt to players being able to get out and get in real quick. You can use it to your advantage, but it also can burn you. And coaches have told me this directly, they sometimes are nervous that if they sneeze the wrong way, they think a player is going to choose to bounce. So that is a concern for you in terms of what you really want to do and how hard you want to be. Which is why, by the way, I do think that I think to connect the dots, I do think after Texas Tech, which is why we saw a little bit more of a fiery Neil Brown. Yep. I think he said to himself before that presser, you know what? Screw it. If I'm getting fired, I'm not going to coddle these players anymore. Yep. I'm going to send a message that you sucked out there. So
Yeah.
you should have played better under any head coach.
Yeah,
So I think that's why you see a little bit more.
We're definitely seeing a different side of Coach Brown.
Yeah, I think he's thinking, and I would do this. I don't fault him. I would do the same thing if I were him. I think he's coming out there now thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be fired, but if I am, I want my mark to be clear that, yeah, I didn't get the program where I was supposed to get it to, but these players, JT Daniels throwing 3 picks for the first time in his whole career. Bryce Ford Whedon, who had 4 TDs his first 2 games, hasn't been able to do much since. All the defensive players and fundamentals, we can go on and on.
Yeah.
I think he's going to make it clear and be like, look, I don't care who the head coach is here. That player sucked that day, and he would have been not good for anybody, especially when he just played for me hard a week earlier. So I don't know what's going on there. So I think, yeah, it's a little different, Neil Brown. But that's fair to bring up the COVID year. Because when you let in by saying we haven't had a situation since the late 70s without at least 1 year of more than 6 wins in 4 years, well, that includes a COVID year where you lose a game because of the COVID pandemic that nobody can predict and the schedule's all truncated. So maybe they would have had a 7th win that season. I mean, who knows? I mean, so it's harder to manage there. It was a harder season. It was a season of chaos. If you want to go one more year, that's fair. But I do think at the end of next season, or certainly in the midst of next season, that excuse can't be there anymore because then you're 5 years in, you're in another year. You had a makeup year kind of for COVID as a mulligan. Yeah. But players get a mulligan. I mean, players in college football are receiving a mulligan for COVID. Yeah. So do you give that to a coach as well? But he also, you look around the country, there are coaches that because of the transfer portal are able to quickly turn a program around from being really bad to really good really quickly.
Right.
So Neil Brown's not having success doing that, even when you bring in a guy like JT Daniels.
I agree. And that's where I was going to go. You can make Chris Kleiman was hired the exact same year Neil Brown was. Kansas State is a lot better football team than West Virginia right now. So he's been able to handle it. Look at what Lance Leipold's done at Kansas. I mean, yes, they've only won 5 games, but they're better than West Virginia. I mean, there's no argument.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And then
he did it in a year and a half, and Kansas was the worst team in college football, arguably. So,
and obviously TCU is a veteran team, but this is 1 year in as a head coach, and all of a sudden they're class the conference. With Gary Patterson, to be fair, he did a great job for 20 years, but they were floundering with the same
players.
Yeah. So
and, I mean, Joe was coaching high school football 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He just beat Neil Brown 48-10. So I personally, my personal opinion is a COVID excuse can't be used anymore. Now the only part of that I could say might make some sense is this. A lot of the players who they're relying on this year were still guys who were recruited by Dana Holgorsen.
Yeah.
Bryce Ford Wheaton was a Dana Holgorsen recruit. Sam James was a Dana Holgorsen recruit. Now he hadn't played yet under Holgorsen, but Dana did recruit him because a lot of people I don't think remember, Neil Brown didn't start till January. That class had already been signed in December. His entire first season was almost all Dana Holgorsen players.
Yeah. Which is why people gave him kind of a pass for that year.
Because of that COVID year, a lot of those guys are still on the roster. Now, you can argue that some of those guys, or maybe if it wasn't for those guys, would be even worse. And that's possible. But at the same time,
that's an argument that the cover wasn't as bare. That's like a defensive Dana argument.
Exactly. But you could also look at it and say, well, maybe if he'd had a chance to, maybe if he'd had an extra year to bring in his own guys, we'd be. I mean, you can look at it both ways.
100%. But I mean, Mountaineer fans won't want to hear this at all. But like one that jumps out of my mind, I think the issue is that head coaches today, it's not. To your point, with a college program, I don't think it's really fair to ever judge any head coach of a basketball or football program until he's there 3 years. Because until you're getting to year 3 at minimum, it is likely the other guy's crap, whether it's good or bad. So if the guy's having tremendous success, it might be because the other guy's players are still there. If the guy's struggling, it might be because the other guy's players are still there. Yeah. So in terms of fully judging a guy to what you know you're going to get for the next contract, I would like to see at least 4 or 5 years with a head coach. In today's day and age, that just doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
And I heard Rich Rodriguez, this is what I didn't think fans would want to hear, but Rich Rodriguez talked about this on the Pat McAfee show a few months ago. He got fired at Michigan after leaving West Virginia into his 3rd year. He literally said, I was a little surprised, even though it's Michigan, because I didn't get to do anything with pretty much any of my players. The Rich Rod they hired, they never got. Because I'm trying to clean up the previous regime, it does take about 2.5 years to clean that up, whether it's good or bad. So maybe you do have to think of that as well. And then you have the COVID year, so it's hard to fix things. So that would be the argument of maybe it will take going into next year to figure that out. And the feather in the cap that would be for Neil Brown that goes off what you're saying there is, despite the program not climbing wins and loss wise, the one thing that even Neil Brown Starch's critics cannot deny, he is recruiting really well at West Virginia for that program not winning. So does that maybe say that once he gets his guys in there, it'll be different? Like, what if we're talking 2 years from now and you have 2 years of Rodney Gallagher and Jaheim White playing together, does he think that's Pat White and Steve Slayton? Like, but you just can't wait for a guy to be there forever to be able to see that. Unfortunately,
I'm of the opinion, and I don't mean no disrespect to the guys Danny recruited. I love those guys. They're they stuck it out through some adversity.
Yeah, because Sam James is stepping up now.
I mean, he is. So I'm not trying to. I don't mean this, but I think when you look at the team as a whole, I think you could make the argument that the most talented guys on our team. Not saying most experienced are the ones that are playing the most.
Yeah.
But you could say the guys with the most talent were the guys Neil recruited. I mean, you can make that. Yeah. I mean, you look at C.J. Donaldson. You look at Nico. Yeah. You look at Jacoby Spales, who has the potential to be a superstar.
Yeah.
Mumu Ben Wahad, who could be Aubrey Burks. Aubrey Burks has actually been playing really well, by the way.
Yeah. So has Spells. Yeah.
I think Aubrey Burks is only a redshirt freshman, isn't he? So
yeah.
I mean, you could make the argument.
I mean, Sean Martin, he gave playing time too.
Yeah, Sean Martin's one I left out. Wyatt Milam, Zach Frazier. He recruited all those guys.
Yeah.
And those guys, you could argue, are the most talented players we have on our team. From Caden Prather. You could argue they're the most Justin Johnson. I mean, I'm still going. I mean, but a lot of
that does give you reason to believe that next year, when those players maybe get more playing time, and also, to be fair, if JT does come back, I mean, you're going to do what's right for the player. But I mean, if JT does come back next year, they only got to build chemistry with him since the end of May. Right. I mean, that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
A whole nother year. I mean, he really likes who's there. He's a really smart kid. He could try to use COVID and all that to his advantage to play a whole nother, come back another year.
I think Neil does a great job recruiting high school talent, but I don't think he's figured out the transfer portal yet. That's what I think.
No,
he struggles with the transfer portal. I don't think they've evaluated guys properly, is my opinion.
Right, and you could argue that even though he brought in JT Daniels, that hiring Graham Harold is what brought in JT Daniels, and if he didn't hire Graham, then he wouldn't have JT, and then it would be really no big guy that he got from the portal. But maybe it takes a year or two to figure out that transfer portal, because there's a lot of.
Yeah, maybe. Brian Palende hasn't really panned out the way they thought. I mean, he's been having his Pro Football Focus scores have been pretty much at the bottom of almost every game this year as far as blocking. Obviously, the defensive backs they got out of the portal haven't panned out.
And so, Mike, with 3 ACL tears in three years,
I feel so bad for him.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't predict that either. Even though he doesn't give you much reception wise anymore, that's a big deal for the blocking, for the running game, for the team. So. Yeah, I mean, that exists as well. Again, there's things you can say on both sides, and I do want just people to give some pause before you immediately say, well, the record's not what it is. I'm sick of this. He's lying to you. Like, it's 4 years in. We got to be done. There are arguments on both sides that could give you pause. As much as I do think Shane Lyons has swung and missed on scheduling games that are too freaking tough for a program that's not going to ever really be an elite power on a regular basis. It's exciting to play a Bama coming up, but I mean, losing 2 years in a row by 10 points plus a piece in those two games, that's not going to do much for your program in all reality. Right. And having all these rivalry games all on the road, 3 straight years. It's going to be 4 straight years as a Power 5. Nobody in the Power 5 is doing this 4 years in a row, playing a rivalry game week 1 on the road. I don't think they're going to beat Penn State next year on the road. It's going to be really cool. I'm going to go cover it. I never covered a game there. My wife's a PSU alum. I'm going to bring her.
Oh, that'll be fun.
It's going to be really, really cool. And then we're going to drive home, and Penn State's probably going to have won significantly. I mean, who knows? And they're not what they think they are either, but they're better than West Virginia. So It's on the road, like scheduling of those. Like, how did you get in the meetings and be like, I want to bring back all these rivals and we'll agree to have them all start on the road?
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
the
that,
scheduling has been atrocious. I'll be
yeah.
honest
So
with
like
you.
that, and then and the extension. I mean, those are all hits to Shane Lyons. So maybe it is more Shane Lyons than Neil Brown. I mean, it's not like anybody out there can expect Neil Brown when he was offered all this extension and all the buyout.
Turn it down.
Because I also saw people saying, well, if he's really a good guy, he would step down. If he steps down, he doesn't get the money. You're not going to.
I don't care how good of a guy you are. That would be stupid.
Oh yeah, that'd be insane. Like that would just be. I mean, like you can't have him turn that down. If I'll tell you right now, for anyone who I'm not a football coach, even though I cover him. If Shane Lyons offers me a contract to coach the Mountaineers, $1 million, I'm taking it, and we're going to lose. And
Absolutely.
I'm going to take the job. So
yeah, what do you? There's nothing unethical about honoring a contract.
Yeah, if you don't like the contract situation, then that's not Neil Brown's fault.
It's not. He has. I heard through I don't know his agent's name, but they said the agent he's got is like the top. He's like the best agent in the business.
Clearly.
Clear. I mean,
clear.
I think he's the agent for a lot of these the highest paid coaches out there.
Yeah, so, and he might have thought that Neil Brown was going to be that guy ascending because that was kind of what he was thought to be.
Well, South Carolina was reportedly trying to get Neil.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
And West Virginia was afraid to lose him, so they gave him his contract. That's what kept him on board, supposedly.
Yeah. And people do forget that South Carolina, there were rumors about that at the time, and that was right after you thought the program was climbing. But I mean, it's still like you don't want to lose them, but you got to make sure you're not like were you really sold? Like that's just a lot.
I mean, it's not like if he had, like you said, if they had just won a bowl game and won 8 games or something, maybe. But 6-4 when you didn't play Oklahoma, you beat Army. I mean, no disrespect to Army, but it's Army.
Right. They didn't play anybody else who was good on that schedule all year. I know Army. I think they won 9 games that year. Everyone was saying Army was real legit. It was crazy. They weren't in a bowl game prior. So that was a great service. West Virginia did even get him in there. And that's another reason why people love Neil Brown so much. He politicked to get Army in the game. Like Neil Brown is just a good guy, but Army didn't play anybody. And once they played somebody, they lost.
Yeah. And it was we were losing most of that game.
Yeah. It wasn't like a blowout. Right.
But anyway.
Yeah,
anyway,
you figured they would have lost Oklahoma.
Real quick, somebody had left a nice comment for us, and I want to read if I can find it again.
Sure.
Basically, somebody on here said they appreciated you and I for being adults in the way we discussed the Mountaineers. But anyway, I can't find it. It's okay. But,
I mean, but no, I mean, I got to be honest with you. Whether people like it or not, I'm going to kind of be the same way. I'm just honest. I do keep it real, and I think I'm realistic. But yeah, I mean, it does. When you have a program that I get it, everyone is West Virginia is one of the programs out there, regardless of what anybody thinks about the program historically or presently. There is a rabid fan base across the country, and this would be why they would be attractive to a major conference. Yeah. There's going to be tons of eyeballs and interest. There's going to be tons of passion that are there, and I think that. We can argue all day about different years they should claim as a national title or maybe should have won or different things that should have went on or if there's a 12-team playoff. It's one of the hungriest fan bases in the country. You could compare maybe West Virginia Mountaineer fans in college football. It's like being a Chicago Cubs fan prior to 2016. You're historic. You're going to be brought up in a lot of historic conversations, but you're not yet you're just not having experienced the success that you would maybe want. And there were missed opportunities here or there. So I can see the hunger that's there and the passion that's there. And I think that's why people do get frustrated if they're not maybe getting their way in a conversation, but yeah, you got to remain as an adult. It's not like, it's really also not like that anything I say is going to matter. I mean, they're going to do what they want to do. Right, they're not going to listen to me.
It was Nathan Travis, by the way. I found the comment. It was Nathan Travis. Nathan, thank you for the kind words, man.
I see it now, yeah.
And I'm not afraid. I did a video about a way, hey, because I've been on they needed to go a different direction with Brown,
Right.
But I've been on that bandwagon, even though I like the guy. But I did a video. I guess I released it yesterday about maybe you could renegotiate Neil's contract and find a way to keep him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
There may be other options out there other than just all right, we're done. Move on, right?
Yeah,
you could save the university a lot of money.
Yeah,
maybe save some recruits. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, his
allow
agent,
him,
I guess, probably wouldn't want to do that.
No, he wouldn't. But at the end of the day, the agent works for him, right?
Right. I mean, maybe Neil would want to do it. Maybe there'd be ways to.
Something similar to what Jim Harbaugh did at Michigan.
Because that's an elite power, and quite frankly, I could argue that based on the expectations that should exist in Michigan, they should have fired him. You're there for that long, and you're getting in mediocre bowl games at Michigan, where Derek Jeter, Nike, they're funneling you money even when it wasn't legal. Like, you're Michigan.
Yeah.
Like, no, you could argue he's underachieved despite the last 2 years at Michigan as long as he's been there. So that's the difference of expectation. But maybe Neil Brown would do something like that. He maybe would argue that he already conceded by bringing in Graham Harrell and kind of giving the keys to the offense away because he was very much involved in past years, regardless of who's coaching that staff. But maybe he would do that. Maybe there would be, I mean, I will say I think he's coming back. I think the one thing that would push him not to come back, and it would be regardless of the buyout, and I guess I'll leave you with this, and I will not drop any names. I'm not even going to probably write an article about this unless someone would be okay with me. But I know for a fact, and I've been reached out to by some heavy boosters, if they would stop donating with contingents on different decisions, not like they're running the program, they're not going to just do things that they want to do, but I could see that being a factor because that hasn't happened to this point. They've all been donating regardless of who's been the coach. I mean, if they would do things like that and you would lose, because then you're affecting kids' scholarships.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously the money can be made back quicker now with the Country Roads Trust. Maybe that would be like they wouldn't care because they can funnel it a different way. But yeah, maybe Neil would restructure. Maybe if he did move on from Neil, Graham Harrell would agree to stay on as an assistant. Maybe he doesn't want to be a head coach. And maybe you would, granted, a new guy would want his own staff in there, but maybe you would, I don't know, bring in
and require him to make changes on his staff too was part of that.
Or maybe you would you would keep Neil Brown, have him restructure and require him to make more changes, like kind of maybe requiring him to fire Jordan Leslie, who just hasn't worked out this year. I mean, I don't know. Maybe a lot of this would be continued on different things. I do think that at the end of next year, if Neil Brown is back and the season is the same way it's been this year, so that'll be 3 straight years of the same, that he then will be relieved of his duties. But you do need to be cautious because the other decision when you're making or you're firing a head coach is, can you do better? I mean, that was one of my concerns when there basically was in a way, a mutual parting of ways when Dana Holgorsen, left for Houston. That marriage kind of divorced itself, kind of like West Virginia with Jared Dagey. Can West Virginia do better? I mean, he was winning 7 or 8 games a lot of the time. Like, who are they going to bring in? Can they do better? I was really happy about Neil Brown and sold Neil Brown, but he was kind of a dominant in the rough as a group of 5 guy. Can you do better? I mean, are they going to really, who are they really going to get? Are they going to, because they're paying you have to think, if they would fire Neil Brown today and pay a buyout that big, would they then be willing to also pay a coach that you want a contract that he would be willing to come for? Or would they get cheap with the new hire? There's a lot into this that I don't think fans really think about. They just want to, because these programs, they kind of treat it like they do their NFL team, that they're not winning. We got to find a new guy, but there's a lot more that goes into it for a college program.
Right. Well, you made a comment about the boosters. So if boosters are threatening to stop paying, then that tells me that they have the money for the buyout. Would that be a fair assumption?
That's maybe. Well, because there are reports now that that there are people that are reporting that the buyout is not as big of an issue that fans and media members are making it out to be. So if those reports are correct, to be fair, it might be because of what the boosters are saying.
Right. And that's what I was thinking too. Yeah. Okay. That's a fair statement. Fair
maybe. Maybe. I mean, it could be though that if he's kept that it's more because of the recruiting class. Like, I don't know. If I had to bet right now, I think he's back next year and that'll be it. If I had to bet right now, but it may be continuing on the rest of the season. And you also
Yeah.
maybe could read some tea leaves on how he sounds. Like if they just keep getting mollywopped in these games and he starts getting really angry in press conferences when we've never seen that from him, maybe I think he's finally feeling the pressure. I don't think he was on the hot seat before this year. I think they were fully invested in figuring this to be a better season. But I think the entire university is surprised, including him, that this is going the way it is. And I think he's feeling the pressure finally. I don't think he was feeling it before this year.
I agree. Well, Mike, look, man, I just realized I got to go pick my daughter up from school.
I don't want you to miss that. So
I didn't realize what time it was, man. So I'm
No
going to have to
problem.
jump off here. I really
No
appreciate
problem,
you
man.
joining me on this show, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks for everybody on the chat room. We got 75 people in the chat. It's a great audience. I really appreciate you guys, especially for a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I appreciate you guys hopping on with us. And go check out Mike's work at WV Sports Now. He's got his YouTube channel. He's got his articles, website. Go check it out. Check him out at Mike Asti 11. It's at MikeASTI 11. Until the next time, guys, keep country roads.